Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be heading over to Conference USA to take a look at Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders, who finished 3-9 last season. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their Blue Raider Showcase on April 12th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is the host of the Blue Raider podcast. He is a sports contributor for Main Street Media. Many are crediting him with catching the zebra, running around down there around Middle Tennessee. He is Jake Bolden. Jake can be found on X at Blue Raider Pod. Welcome to the show, Jake.
Luke, quite the introduction there. As yes, I have recently added zebra, I guess, extraordinaire now here in Murfreesboro. Those that are listening to us nationwide, I assume it's made its stretches from Miami all the way up to Seattle. But yes, we are zebra wranglers here in Murfreesboro. It's been quite the story, and I'm excited to talk about all things zebra and MTSU football today.
All right, Jake, for those who are just turning in to the G5 High for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering Middle Tennessee football?
Well, as you put it there in that intro, I've been working with Main Street Media here in Murfreesboro for, I'm going on year 8 now. I was on the beat for MTSU for at least 6 of those years. And then I started this Blue Raider podcast back in December of 2023. So we're rolling strong here in year number 2 of doing the podcast and actually doing my own media credentialing for that, for football and all things MTSU for that matter. So it's been a pleasure going into this second tenure here of a head coach in Derek Mason. And so it's definitely made things exciting. And I hope if you're listening and you're finding me for the very first time, you tune in, because hopefully this will be a much better than a 3-9 season.
Well, let's get to that Middle Tennessee football team and start with the offense. For those who are not familiar with the Blue Raiders, can you describe the type of offense they run?
The best way to put it, because we are also in the second season of Bodie Reeder as the offensive coordinator here, a guy that has had a lot of experience, but not necessarily at this level as offensive coordinator. He's been mostly a quarterback coach with a lot of people. Speaking of G5, you've got Mason Fine at North Texas, a very famous quarterback in Conference USA history, but in his system in particular that we saw in year 1, he likes to run a lot of 11 and 12 personnel, not necessarily a pro style or an air raid that we've seen in years past with Rick Stockstill. He loves the vertical passing game. And he also likes to describe that he wants the offense to be a physical downhill running team. As we kind of dig into the nuts and bolts of the offense here, we'll break this down more. But he's had his challenges in year 1, just given the personnel and the guys that he had to scrape together this last year. So this year, I think we're going to see, hopefully, a better version of what Bodie Reeder's offense looks like.
Well, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. Second-year starter Nicholas Vadiato is back for another season. How did he look in the spring?
Good as always. He's a true leader. He's a guy that's been here for a long time, going all the way back to his freshman year where he was a Hawaii Bowl MVP, a guy that had to pick himself up from the bootstraps as a third-string quarterback that year and won the bowl game. But he is the epitome of what Coach Mason wants, just a true leader through and through, well-spoken individual, a guy that, I would like to think he gets his opportunity at the next level, maybe not necessarily in the NFL, but you have all these underling divisions now that play through the summer. I certainly think he has the talent and ability to be in that position, and this is kind of his make or break final season to really prove that he belongs playing in the next level.
You talked about that staff coming into year 2. So Vadiato's entering year 2 with this new staff. What type of growth are you expecting to see from him this season?
This will be the first time as a starter that he's had the same offensive coordinator. Going into year 3, he had a few starts there when in Stockstill's final year. So him finally having some consistency under his belt, not only with the coaching staff, but also with a few of his players. I know that he's going to be losing 2 of his major targets this year. But when you talk about his style, 3,000 yards in both of the last 2 seasons. He led Conference USA in yards per game. This year, you hope with an improved offensive line, if he can just improve some of those efficiency numbers, again, he could really stand out not only in Conference USA, but in G5 as a whole.
We talked about some of those passing numbers. For those not familiar with Vadiato, can you describe his playing style to our listeners?
This last year under Bodie Reeder, I would say his style took a little step back in terms of its versatility. 2 years ago, he rushed for nearly 400 yards. So when you look at a guy that threw for 3,000 and rushed for 400, the best way to describe it if you didn't watch him is he's a very scrappy individual. He's able to make do with what he has on his feet. And he's a gamer. This is a guy that will put his head down to get that 10th yard for the first down. He's not going to slide. Now, all things considered, I think as he's gotten older, he's gotten a lot smarter because this last season he only rushed for 77 yards. So we didn't see him evade the pocket too frequently this last year. However, the ability is certainly there, but in Bodie Reeder's offense, he is more of a pocket presence guy that is going to be, he has the arm. He can make just about any throw he wants. In the old style, left to right, more of the air raid style, he can make those throws. But as we've seen with guys like Miles Butler, guys that we'll be talking about, more of a vertical threat with the X receivers, he can make the 30, 40-yard deep pass.
Last season, Roman Gagliano was an early enrollee, true freshman. He was able to get some playing time last season. Is it safe to assume that he has that number 2 spot locked up, or is there someone else we need to keep our eyes on?
I think he is safely in the number 2 spot, much like he was last season. There was speculation that maybe Luther Richardson is a guy that could take up that 2nd spot, but after the spring game, Roman kind of stood out, taking majority of those snaps in the spring game last year. This year they did more of a spring showcase. Roman took a lot of those second snaps in that as well. He's the future of MTSU football. He's waiting in the wings behind Nick Vadiato. One of the things that has impressed me is the fact that he has this willingness to wait and learn, which in today's age, as we all know, especially here at the G5 Hive, that guys don't like to sit and wait. And he's a guy that has been very patient and learning everything he can from Vadiato. They even host an in-house podcast called the Roman Empire that he does along with Nick. So those two really have meshed well since Roman stepped on campus last year. And I look forward really to the future that is Roman Gagliano, but I don't want to lust away this final season of Vadiato.
So Gagliano, you mentioned he's the future. What growth have you been able to see, or what are you hearing around the campus heading into year 2?
He didn't get a lot of real live snaps this last season. A lot of it was in garbage time. So it's hard to necessarily judge what he's able to do in those situations because they were handoff situations. The most game-like reps I've seen was in spring of last year. The one downside to Gagliano's game then was the game just seemed to be fast. And that is typical with a freshman quarterback entering college. The game just speeds up for him and made a lot of ill-timed passes. But one thing that is promising about Roman is the fact that he has great size at quarterback. He has as good of an arm as Vadiato does, in my opinion. He lacks maybe the accuracy, but you haven't seen those game reps quite yet. But if the game can slow down for him, he can learn a little bit more of that back office film study that you see with Vadiato, someone that is a real student of the game. I think Gagliano is a guy that could really fill in those shoes well next year.
Well, moving on to the running game, the Blue Raiders used Jaden Credle to run the ball 87.9% of the time in 2024. The other 12% was split between Jaquel Middlebrook, Terry Wilkins, and Frank Peasant. Wilkins and Peasant have hit the portal. That leaves 173 rushing attempts, 734 yards, and 7 touchdowns up for grabs in 2025. Jaquel Middlebrook returns in 2025. And after the spring, the staff added Ricky Hunt Jr. from the portal. How did this room look as a whole during the spring?
Well, going into the spring, you actually felt really good because you had the ability to have Credle back as he was going to be added for another year. He's no longer eligible for academic purposes. So, unfortunately, the Raiders will be without him. So that leaves, to answer your question, young. The whole running back room is young. There's not an upperclassman in the bunch. Jaquel Middlebrook is the lone player with experience for the Blue Raiders, other than Hunt Jr., as you said, who has some years under his belt. But it's all, you got 5 other freshmen, guys that have not played a snap in college. So there's going to be a lot of learning, growing up quickly, if you will, with a lot of these incoming freshmen, because with the style that Coach Reeder has in the 12 personnel, you're going to have two running backs out there at some point in time. And if it's anything like we saw last year, Flip got most of the carries. Flip Credle got most of those carries, but Terry Wilkins entering the portal, Frank Peasant, those are guys, 4 guys saw an amount of snaps last year. So that means you're going to have 2 freshmen at minimum see some snaps this year. So they're going to have to grow up a lot this year.
Well, I guess, just based on all the youth, that 1-2 punch is probably Middlebrook and Hunt Jr.
That would be my guess. Again, not seeing a spring game where last year we got to see guys like Austin Clemens, who is one of the redshirt freshmen. He was on roster last year, but they redshirted him. They liked him a lot. And when I bring him up because he's a guy that I think could potentially push Hunt Jr. for that second spot. But given, again, Hunt is a very technical back, and the fact that he is a bowling ball. He's a guy that's going to be used in very specific situations, so he'll find his way onto the playing field. So it's hard to really say, much like we saw last year, Credle getting majority of those carries, what is a 2, where 2, 3, 4 all get the same amount of carries. But I would have to think in the event that Middlebrook isn't on the field, Hunt would be that second guy. Yeah.
You kind of described Hunt's skill set, if you will, and body style. How would you describe Middlebrook and, what he does or what he excels at?
He just does everything well. And I know that that's not the answer that an NFL scout is looking for, but he's a guy that he can do just about everything. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's a great downhill runner, similar to what we saw with Flip Credle. He's a little undersized per se than your typical college running back, but he's elusive, and that seems to work for him really well. So he's a guy that they're going to lean on him heavily this year. And given the freshman campaign that he had, you got to look forward to what he can do with his sophomore campaign. And even too, him being a part of that running back room last year, something that Derek Mason said was the most competitive running back room he's ever coached in his entire history of coaching. And that says a lot for a guy that has made his rounds in the coaching ranks. So being a guy that got a lot of snaps in that already loaded running back room speaks volumes to where Middlebrook's game is now as a sophomore, but where it can go by the time he's a senior. And much like I've already alluded to in this show, this may be the last year he's in Murfreesboro. So he's a guy that I'm really excited about. And they've got tons of guys, and I'm sure we'll get to those freshmen. But Middlebrook is going to be the horse for this team.
Well, you talked about some of those younger guys, and who are those younger guys you think maybe stands out the most?
Austin Clemens is one, as I already touched on, that the staff really loved him, redshirted him because of how deep that room was. I look forward to seeing what he can do this year now that he's going to be getting those snaps. Another one of the freshmen, DJ Taylor, is a local Murfreesboro talent. He actually won the state championship this last month in the 100-meter and 200-meter dash, so he is the fastest kid in Tennessee. It has obviously great straight line speed as a track runner is, but he's also a very large kid for his size. I think that he's going to get a lot of opportunities. DJ didn't necessarily get the touches from a receiving perspective, so that's something that I know that Reeder likes to utilize, especially with guys like Middlebrook, get them out into open space, move them horizontally. That's a part of his game that's going to have to grow a little bit. But if he can find that touch, that'll be another great 1-2 punch, because he is much larger than Hunt Jr. or Middlebrook for that matter. So he offers another dynamic that those two running backs don't offer.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask anyway. Which running back gets that first carry versus Austin P?
I would be surprised if it wasn't Middlebrook, as I'm sure you're guessing. But you never know. Like, I know last year we used to joke that coaches they'll practice all fall in their 11 or 12 personnel, and then they'll come out the first snap of the game and they'll run a 22 or something crazy. Yeah. So, I guess if I was a betting man, I would bet against Middlebrook just because that's what we like to do here at MTSU. But I would have to say he's going to get the nod against Austin P.
Well, let's move over to the wide receivers. Their leading wide receiver in terms of targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns from a year ago, Omari Kelly, is off to Michigan State. This room also graduates Hayes Sutton and Mitchell Howell, while they see Javante Sherman, Kellen Stewart and Ethan Crate hit the portal. This room is highlighted by the return of Miles Butler, who you mentioned earlier, along with Cameron Lacey and Gamarian Carter. What has the staff done to address the depths in this room?
As far as addressing it's hard because you lost so much top end talent in Omari Kelly, as you touched on, and Kellen Stewart was another guy that really came on for him late in the year. You had to find your deep threats, something that this team missed with Omari Kelly. He had the ability to really take the roof off of a defense, but also he's a guy that was a great route runner, much like you'll see at Michigan State this year. And I had said on this exact episode last year that Omari Kelly was someone that you needed to watch for. And what can I say, guys? You take my advice to Vegas. I don't lie, but as far as it goes, to address the depth, they had to get guys that could do what Omari did. And you're not going to find Omari Kelly again, I don't think, in these guys that they have on roster, but they found guys that are good route runners, and they found guys that can have straight line speed, can take the roof off of a defense, much like we'll talk about here in a second. So maybe didn't necessarily address replacing Omari Kelly because that's a hard find to get, but you found guys that have those tools that Omari had that you can now supplement with a more versatile group now that you're not so top heavy like you were with Omari Kelly and Holden Willis.
Well, Vadiato targeted Omari Kelly 36.9% of the time last season, which nearly doubled that of the next wide receiver in this room. You mentioned not necessarily having the next Omari Kelly on this roster, but who of these wide receivers has the tools to do what Omari Kelly did, like you talked about, in taking the roof off a defense?
Miles Butler would have to be the lead guy as far as who's going to be the number one target. He's more of your wide receiver, where much like Omari was, he's going to be the leading returner on the receiving group. He had 366 yards, 3 touchdowns. Gamarian Carter, the Vandy transfer, he got a few snaps last year as well. We really thought the 1-2 punch was going to be Carter and Kelly. Carter kind of took a back seat with Butler there, as well as we'll get to the tight ends. Holden Willis obviously is a more versatile tight end, someone that you don't see very much at any level of football. So that's another kind of, I guess, side topic to this discussion is, what does this offense do now that you don't have the versatile tight end? You've got to find a slot receiver that can kind of do that for you, because I don't want to foreshadow too much before we get to the tight ends, but they don't have a Holden Willis. They don't have a guy that is getting fall camp invites to the NFL. So they've got to find a way to kind of shore that up. But to go back to your original question, Miles Butler is a guy that I really like. As far as the transfers go, you have A.J. Jones, who came in from Arizona, saw a limited snaps there. And then you have Najee Cox. He's a junior college transfer from Fresno City. Both of these guys are 6'3+, so very large guys. Cox I like a lot as a vertical threat. That was kind of his game. If you watch his tape at Fresno City, just a guy that would outrun his defender and he'd make the big play. I believe his catch, he averaged over 20 yards per catch last year, just to give you kind of an idea of the type of talent that he is. So you've got guys that can spread us out vertically, much like I alluded to at the beginning. That's what Reeder wants to do. He wants guys that can, stretch the field vertically as opposed to horizontally.
So this room, you got 4 true freshmen. You've got some redshirt freshmen. You got the transfers. Miles Butler, we've talked about. Who in this room's going to have the biggest impact for this team here in 2025?
I love this question because it gives me an opportunity to talk about my personal favorite wide receiver. And again, I hit my home run with Omari Kelly. So you take notes here that Cameron Lacey is going to be my favorite receiver. And I know if any of my guys over at Go Middle are listening to this podcast, they're rolling their eyes because he's an undersized wide receiver. He's a slot guy, but the kid is elusive. I love to describe him as a slippery wide receiver. Defenses will just lose him, and he's got great hands. He reminds me so much of the Richie James, as those that follow the NFL closely, the last draft pick from MTSU. A Ty Lee, if you really love MTSU football, you can go back that far. Another guy that was undersized but just had great hands. And so the reason I think he is going to have the biggest impact is because they're good at the X and Y's. What do you have at the slot? Cameron is a guy that's going to be, no pun here, but an X factor. He's going to be a guy that has to make those plays. He has to be that third switch that Vadiato can turn to in the event that guys like Miles Butler and AJ Jones have great seasons like we think that they will, we saw Omari Kelly, his season kind of taper off because defenses would shade a safety over to him. They would double team him in certain situations. You've got to have that triple threat outside of Omari Kelly and Holden Willis. And I think Cameron, having a year now, got a few games under his belt, I really expect this year for him to kind of take off.
This room's young. I mentioned the 4 true freshmen, the 2 redshirt freshmen. Maybe looking forward to the end of this season, do you think there's like one of these guys that might pop off towards the end of the year?
It's tough to say. I think this group especially is very top heavy with their upperclassmen. As far as younger guys that we'll see get some snaps, incoming freshman Neo Clifton, another local talent, a guy that is very quick, has great route running for such a young player. He does have good size too at this level. We would hope to see like Kason Stokes, Amarian Walker. Those are guys that I don't necessarily know too much about because of their late arrivals onto campus. But those are guys that didn't get what they wanted in their previous stops. And much like the Omari Kelly and Gamarian Carter stories of years past, maybe that they have the opportunity, but those are guys that I hear floating around that have the opportunity to get some snaps that, might surprise us. And if it's anything like last year, we're going to have injuries. And so much like we talk about the running back room, you need some of these younger guys to grow up.
Well, moving over to the tight ends, and obviously when you have a talent like Holden Willis, that's going to impact the game plan. But how do you think in general terms, how does Middle Tennessee want to utilize the tight ends in this offense?
Creatively, maybe if I had to put it down into one word, and that's something that Bodie Reeder has said in the past, is he likes to be creative. Holden Willis gave you that Swiss Army knife where he could do everything. He could put his finger down. He could block for you. He can get out in the slot and he can run. He could even take a few carries on a jet sweep. I mean, he kind of did a little bit of everything for you, and he's certainly going to be sorely missed. But with what we have now, you're not going to be, I would say, with Willis, you were a little bit unpredictable. They're going to be a little bit more predictable from the tight end position this year, but I still think Bodie Reeder's going to find a way to be creative with some of these weapons he has, because he did find guys that have great hands. As we'll get into, you've got the Purdue transfer, you've got Louisiana Tech transfer coming in, the guys that have the ability to catch the ball. So, and maybe he would surprise, Bodie Reeder, that is, would surprise us and give those guys the opportunity to catch the ball more.
Well, we alluded to this earlier, but we just got done talking about wide receivers. The team's leading receiver in terms of snaps, targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns was first team all-conference tight end Holden Willis. How does the team look to replace that production in 2025?
I guess if the question really is, are you going to be able to have that again? I don't know that they'll ever have that ever again. Holden Willis is such a special talent. And so I guess to fall back though, are you able to find 800 yards somewhere else? I think you almost have to, assuredly, because again, you don't have Omari Kelly and Holden Willis, that dynamic duo. So I would anticipate that you're not going to have that type of receiving production, even collectively as a group, from the tight end position, because you just don't have Holden Willis there. But you do have guys that I think have the ability to again make plays in space, like the Tavion Galloway, the Purdue transfer, that could potentially be something like that. But I think, as we saw last year, they need more help blocking. So they have a little bit of a turn, especially with these high school signees, guys that can do a little bit of that two-way, that are good blockers as well, especially I say on the offensive run side of things, but have good hands. But I think we've seen a shift now that Holden is gone, at least in the recruiting philosophy of finding guys that are more of an assistance on the blocking side of things, something that Holden was not necessarily as good at.
So is it safe to say really that how that lost production probably gets made up is to, like Lacey, for instance, like you said earlier, in the slot?
In a direct one-to-one, I would think someone like Lacey or more, these quicker slot guys are going to be taking more of those yardage. But I would even take it a step further. If you're trying to replace yard for yard here, if you have more tight ends that are giving you an 11 or 12 personnel that are giving the tackles more assistance on the run offense, you're probably going to pick those yards up on the ground, which I know that's something that Reeder wants to do. One of his major keys when we spoke last year was he wants to set the run game first. And that's something that they could not do last year. They were awful in the run game. So I think they want to really dominate in the run game, and you have more tight ends that reflect that as well, that they can run more of a power run style that will, again, alleviate the passing threat that you had to have last year because they couldn't run the football.
Well, moving over to the offensive line, they'll need to replace Simon Wilson, who mostly played at center but moved to left guard and right guard when needed. This room also lost 6 others due to graduation or the transfer portal. This entire line seemed to play 2 or 3 different positions during the season, so versatility shouldn't be an issue, but I would say depth could be a concern this season for the Blue Raiders. Jake, what are your expectations for this O-line heading into the 2025 season?
Can't get worse. I hate to be that way about it, but they can't get much worse. They, as you touched on, they lost their center in Simon Wilson. They had injuries aplenty. They had off-field stuff they have to deal with, guys that had to sit out for suspensions. It was literally just a mess on the offensive line last year, but there are some positives with that because you have to go deep into your pockets to get guys to play the offensive line. So we found guys like Zach Clayton, who was a true freshman last year, who really stepped up for him. And now you feel confident that as a sophomore, he's going to be your starting right tackle. So I say they can't get worse, but they did a good job, I think, in the portal. However, depth, as you touched on, could still be a concern for them. But I feel that last year's situation with Mason getting hired so late made finding those depth pieces very difficult for them, which is why the line suffered with all the injuries and suspensions and stuff. That now he has more of he has high school recruits that he wants. He was able to spend a full offseason getting offensive linemen out of the portal that he wants. That I think that this is going to be a much better offensive line. And like I said, it can't get worse.
So with his offensive line, I know in the spring and doing a showcase is probably hard to really show off, what they can and can't do. But is there anybody in this group that people who watching Middle Tennessee should take note of?
Well, Jacob Otts is one that we were really excited to get on campus and commit here. The transfer from Rhode Island. I know last year one thing that Mason did find in the portal really well was size, but I don't necessarily always consider size. Size is great, especially at this level, but sometimes are your guys efficient with the size that they have? And a lot of these pieces that we had were huge guys, but I don't necessarily consider them athletic linemen that you needed to run the style that Bodie Reeder wants to run. So Jacob Otts is a guy who is 6'7", 300 or 6'5". No, excuse me. That's right. 6'7", 307 pounds. He's going to be your left tackle this year. A guy that was Zach Clayton's spot. Now you're going to switch Zach Clayton back over to right tackle. So now you have 2 big tackles for you. You got EJ Harris, the Auburn transfer, that's going to shore up your left guard spot. Marcus Miller is going to return, a guy that has a lot of college experience, going to be at center. And then you have Mateo Gaivara at right guard. So you have an offensive line now that all of them have at least 1 full season of snaps under their belt. And actually, outside of Zach Clayton, you have 4 guys that have played multiple seasons at the Division I level. So something that, again, that's going to help tremendously. Look as far as the look factor goes. You have guys that look like offensive linemen that know the part and know how to play football.
Who does this offensive line look to kind of be that anchor or the leader of this offensive line?
Well, Mateo Gaivara, as I touched on, who is more than likely going to play right guard. He is a guy that has played a little bit of everywhere on the interior line. He was an all-freshman 2 years ago, a guy that was battling a little bit of injury this last year. Going into his junior season now, he is the longest tenured Blue Raider. So he was here during the Stockstill era. Obviously, that kind of carries some weight as a leader for you. And he knows the culture that Coach Mason wants to have. And so he's a guy that I look to as far as your leadership goes. Marcus Miller, a guy that is going into his 5th year in college. This is his 2nd stop, but it'll be a 2nd year here under Derek Mason. A guy that also can play a little bit of everywhere, has great size at center. If I had to guess, he might be one of the biggest centers in Conference USA this year. So how does he adjust to playing full-time center? Hopefully he can stay healthy for him. But those 2 guys in particular on the interior, I think, are huge. Zach Clayton coming back now after 1 full season of figuring it out as a freshman, literally got forged by fire last year. He's another guy. I know I'm listing 3 guys on a 5-team unit here, but those 3 guys, I just think that this line has to be better because of the experience and now you have this veteranish ship about these guys.
All right, Jake, this is your big question. You nailed it last year with Omari Kelly. If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
My go-to this year, when it comes to our fantasy football league that we'll do with the Conference USA Roundtable, I will unabashedly take Jaquil Middlebrooks. I know Nick Vadiato is going to be a very safe bet for a lot of people, but how much of a breakout is it when a guy throws for 3,000 yards in back-to-back seasons with a bad offensive line? So you might even say he could be quote unquote breakout, but I think Jaquil Middlebrooks. I don't know that the G5 world is ready for Jaquil Middlebrooks. Because again, I don't anticipate if he stays healthy that he's going to remain in Murfreesboro. He's a guy that I look forward to finally being that running back that we haven't seen in at least a decade when Benny Cunningham was here, as we call him, the Georgia Tech Slayer around here in Murfreesboro. But we haven't had someone like that in a very long time.
Well, Jake, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. And before we get into the personnel, can you describe the defensive scheme Middle Tennessee runs for our listeners?
I'll do my best, because what they did last year was they changed it up so much. I mean, they shuffle it around. Brian Stewart is a guy that has been around football. We talk about Derek Mason's history. Brian Stewart has been around football even longer, a guy that has been at all levels, NFL, XFL, Power 5, G5. This guy has been everywhere, and he knows a thing or two about football. And so last year was experimenting with the personnel that he had to find out what defense he likes. Well, I can tell you, assuredly, he likes the 3-4. That's what he wants to run. That's what he's most comfortable in. Unfortunately, last year, he didn't have the personnel to run a 3-4. So you could say last year they ran a 4-3 more than anything. They would like to run a 4-2-5 with two linebackers and a nickel and dime in some scenarios. But I think this year with the personnel, they again had a full year and a half now of actually recruiting guys. They're going to play a lot more of the 3-4 that Stewart is more comfortable coaching.
So, Jake, you talk about moving that defense and getting guys to come in. Can you tell our listeners how difficult that is to have, run a scheme and then switch, going from a 4-3 to a 3-4? That's a different body type, and when you're trying to run something, you don't have the personnel to do it. Can you just talk about what that's like there for Middle Tennessee?
The hardest thing is for most guys is you talk about the 3-4, again, up to plain language, it's 3 down linemen, you got 4 linebackers. And if you look at how MTSU likes to do it, that 4th outside linebacker is considered an edge or a standing linebacker. He'll be the 9 technique. He'll be all the way out on the edge with the tight end. Someone like that, talk about the body type. Obviously, you want length because there are situations where he's going to be responsible for covering someone in pass defense, but also someone that is a threat to rush. So you have to have versatile guys that are on that outside linebacker position. So if you don't have enough guys to fill that void, or if you're getting the roster handed over to you like Brian Stewart really did last year, where he didn't have many guys that he was able to recruit, you're stuck with a lot of interior defensive linemen and trying to fit a square into a round peg, that doesn't work. And so they had to find a way to get more athletic on the edge for those linebackers to kind of fit that more of a 3-4 style defense. And I think it'll fit a lot better because the 4-3 doesn't do, in my opinion, there's guys that are a lot smarter about this that can translate this a lot better. But the best way to look at it is with 4 down linemen in a pass heavy conference, that's not good math. Having someone that is more of a versatile edge on the 9 technique on the outside gives you more weapons. You can disguise your coverages a little bit better, much like Brian Stewart wants to do. So I think now that Stewart is a lot more comfortable with the personnel he has, this defense can finally make strides after being one of the worst in Conference USA last year.
Well, let's dig into the defensive position rooms and start with the guys up front along the defensive line. This group had a lot to fill coming into the 2024 season. This year, we have the entire starting D-line return. While this group brought back its starters, we did see 4 rotational guys graduate or hit the portal. You have to be excited to see this line come back for another season, as in 2024, those starters accounted for 56 pressures and 8 sacks. How did that unit look this spring?
Well, first, it's great to have them all back because the year prior, Stockstill's final year, we had an SEC level front seven, and they went to the SEC. So they literally had to scrap that front seven together. Having those guys back is great. And how do they look? As expected. My only fear is are they getting better? That's something that with the showcase, I am very fearful of. That those numbers are good, but you have to remember that they are part of the worst defense in Conference USA last year. I guess second to Kennesaw State. Those numbers, they've got to improve, and really it starts with a lot of that top end guys. As I know we'll get into with the defensive line here. They need more pressures. They need more sacks because this is a pass heavy league. You've got to help your secondary out. Someone that was very hurt last year was that secondary and linebacker core. So as a whole, though, the defensive line, they've got to stay healthy this year, and they just got to be more. Like I know that's too plain language, and again, there's people that are a lot smarter than me, but they've just got to be better.
Is anyone standing out to you, or anyone you think you're excited to see here in 2025?
As far as who is already there, DeMonte Smith and Felix Hickson, those are your nose tackles, defensive tackles, however you want to describe them. Those are guys that are your only upperclassmen in the defense, in three technique, finger in the dirt guys. Those are the guys that they've got to be your leaders for you. They've got to create that pressure for you, again, to take some of that pressure off of having to rush a fourth guy in those and when the offense is in pass protection. So, those guys in particular, I'm always impressed with them, their size, their quickness. Some other guys, too, that we'll get into them, like Anthony Bynum, someone that led the team in tackles for loss, sacks last year at 6.5 and 2.5 sacks. Again, those numbers have got to be better, but those guys in particular, they look better this year as far as in shape. That's something that I think we'll see with a lot of these younger guys that I look forward to seeing as they develop over this summer strength and conditioning session. Is do some of these younger guys lose some of that baby fat, kind of insert themselves, because they did it with a few guys they got for the defensive line. They are big guys, but they need the depth. They need those guys to be able to play quite a few snaps, and sometimes those freshmen, they get forged by fire, like we saw with Zach Clayton on the offensive side. So I think they're going to need to lose some of that fat on them and be ready to be inserted this year.
Like you said earlier, there's opportunity. You need to see more. Is there one guy in particular you feel is kind of poised to take his game to the next level here in 2025?
Felix Hickson was someone that I thought would do that last year. He's an SEC transfer from South Carolina. Obviously, he still got what's his, and being a nose is hard as it is. Nose tackle is not a sexy position. You don't have Jeffrey Simmons everywhere. You're not going to have a lot of numbers. You might have good run stopping numbers, but Felix Hickson is a guy that he's got to be a force there at the nose. He's got to be the front of that front seven that is able to stop the ground game, something that they struggled with a lot last year, which I think I would put more blame onto the linebacker group. But all things considered, if you have a good 3-down lineman, it's going to help a lot. So Felix Hickson is a guy that I think is going to be much better this year now that he has, a full season. He didn't play very much at South Carolina, but someone that's going to have a second full season under Derek Mason and Brian Stewart. I think he's a guy that could have an impact for him.
Is there a guy on the defensive line, maybe from the defensive end position, that you think can kind of help create that pressure?
Anthony Bynum, as I touched on, he's a guy that he had 6.5 tackles for loss last year. His numbers would improve. Again, I think the 3-4 is going to suit his style a little bit better because he is a little bit more athletic. He's still going to be considered a defensive end, but he offers another level of versatility that the rest don't. He's only a sophomore, so again, growing there. But I think he's another guy that if he has a good year, if he's having a good year, then the defense is doing pretty well, in my opinion.
Well, the linebacking group's going to look to replace production from Jordan Thompson, who's off to Western Carolina. Jalen Davis graduated. However, this room got a boost when Parker Hughes was able to return from his herniated disc after the Duke game last season. Can you talk about the importance of Parker Hughes and having him coming back for the 2025 season?
I hate to say this, but the injury might have been the best thing for an MTSU football fan because that was less games on tape and probably shied away P4s from getting Parker Hughes because all offseason I anticipated Parker Hughes was going to move on, and that never happened. And so to answer your question, I mean, having him back was big as it is to do the best you could with the linebacking group that he had. Because him and Drew Francis is another player that graduated this last year that really never got his feet back underneath him after getting hurt, much like Parker Hughes did. But having him back was a huge impact to the run defense, especially. So to get him back along with some of these new additions is going to be huge for the linebacker group. And again, just taking a step forward for this defense in 2025.
How did that group look in the spring?
Good. And finally, I say that because you have a lot of more cerebral, a lot smarter guys in the linebacker group, along with Parker Hughes, someone that has a lot of college experience. Alex Mitchell, a guy that is a local talent. He's the Chattanooga transfer. Just a guy that is a headhunter, just like Parker Hughes is, someone that is looking to make the tackle, make the play. He's everywhere all at one time. He is a bigger body. He's going to be more of a run stopper, but he is athletic enough that he can help in pass defense as well. Jaden Thompson is another guy that I look forward to seeing him where he kind of transfers. He comes from Itawamba there at the Mississippi, the premier Mississippi junior college league that is. A guy that had a lot of tackles there. So you have a lot of SEC talent coming out of that league. You could like to think that someone like Jaden Thompson can also transfer that to Conference USA. So the group as a whole, they look older and they look a lot smarter. And so I think that's going to help them a lot because there was a lot of situations last year. Again, young guys, it's just how it goes that are searching around, not in the right place at the right time. And this group just not only looks the part, but with the years and the snaps under their belt, you feel really good that this is a very smart, cerebral linebacker group.
So Jake, if they're going to move to a 3-4 defense, typically kind of have like some outside linebackers that'll kind of almost act as edge guys. And you mentioned three guys there: Alex Mitchell, Jaden Thompson. Then we talked about Hughes coming back. Do you think that we'll see all three of them on the field at the same time, or is it kind of be a rotation of two of those guys and one guy comes in, or how do you see that room shaking out week one?
Alex Mitchell and Parker Hughes are going to be your interior or inside linebackers. As far as your outside linebacker goes, I don't know, to answer your question truthfully, because they have a good amount of depth there. I think Jaden Thompson is going to be your most experienced guy that would maybe kind of make him a shoe, and Marion Bailey is another guy that got snaps last year because of injury that impressed in the few games that he got to play. I think that he has a great opportunity to play there as well. Another high school transfer, Micah Smith, a guy that already has Division I size as an incoming freshman at 6'2", 229. He's a guy that they could insert immediately. Comes from a football powerhouse in the Nashville area, Innsworth. So he already played football at a high level at the high school. So you would think the game may be already – he's used to a faster game, which is always the issue with linebackers that when they go from high school to college, much like most positions. But I think linebacker more than anything is the game just comes at you so quickly. So is he smart enough to play linebacker as a freshman? I think he is, because he has the size and the tools to be great at MTSU and at the G5 level. So that's another guy that I think him and Thompson, I would assume, are the front runners for outside linebacker.
Well, moving over to the defensive backfield, they will look to replace cornerback Marvay Myers Glover, who transferred to Marshall, and safety Xavier Williams off to Cincinnati. They also lost 4 others to the portal who played around 14 to 30 snaps a game. But highlighting this room in 2025 returning is John House IV. He was an Iron Man last season as he barely came off the field. The other main guy in this room is 8th-year grad student Brendan Harris. He started and got hurt after 2 games last season. He had a huge game last year versus Ole Miss, in which he had a career high in tackles by halftime. What should we expect in the secondary heading into 2025?
Well, I always love to bring this up because people don't realize this. Xavier Williams, you talked about him there. Xavier Williams, who transferred to Cincinnati this time last year, he was a quarterback. to tell you how depleted that secondary got after 3 weeks, before we even got to conference play, after 4 weeks, how depleted they were in the secondary. We had to put a quarterback at free safety. So all things considered, you got healthier over the offseason, and you got better, because this is the area where they put most of their recruiting into, was picking up guys in the portal. They have 10 total new guys in the secondary as a whole. That's including cornerbacks and safeties. They had 10 new guys either from high school or from the transfer portal. So they're not going to let that happen. I think guys like Kenny Anderson Lofton and Roman Gagliano are safe. I don't think they're going to be transferring over to defense anytime this year. So things considered, they got better there. And then, like you touched on, Brendan Harris, a guy that has 8 years. I mean, again, that's we're going to be hearing that a lot more, unfortunately, but I'm glad Brendan Harris is back, because he has a lot of college experience there at safety. Diari McDonald, another guy that was fighting injury last year, who surprised everyone as a CB1. So you get those two key parts of your defense back, and now you've got 10 new guys that'll fight for playing time everywhere else.
Well, what can you tell us about Harris's injury and his road to recovery?
I don't necessarily know the details on it. I know that it was something that they thought he could potentially come back when he was hurt, but after that, I think it was after the Ole Miss game, they just said it was it. And you kind of hang your head low, because as a guy that at that time was his 7th year, you thought, well, that's it for Brendan Harris. Then senior day came around and he didn't walk. And we think, oh, okay, then maybe there's a chance that this guy gets to play this next year. And sure enough, they wasted no time bringing him back. And I hate to be this way about it, but sometimes maybe that injury was the best thing for him, because now he's going to be a part of a better defensive secondary this year than he was last year. So it's great to have him back, and knock on wood that he stays healthy, because the secondary, they need that. They need him back. And I'm sure he wants to play a full season for his last season.
When we talk about the transfers out, it looks like most of those were from the cornerback room. Kind of what are your expectations, and is there anyone ready to kind of step up and lead this cornerback room?
Well, Diari McDonald is the cornerback one last year. Again, a guy that took big steps in the spring of last year. No one thought that he would even, he might get some playing opportunity, but by the end of spring, he was cornerback one. There was no doubt about it. He can do all the intangible stuff. And again, another local product, something that a lot of Murfreesboroans are very proud of, that McDonald is stuck around here, a guy that transferred in from Cincinnati. So he's going to be your CB1. It's all about who's going to be that next guy. And truthfully, we don't necessarily know. They put a lot of energy and effort into finding those cornerbacks. They got a lot of length there. Jordan Chestnut being one of those guys that transferred in at 6'4". So I don't necessarily. It's hard to say in June who else is going to be partnering aside Diari. You got guys like Ricky Smith, who played the nickel and strong safety. That is a transfer from Purdue. He left much to be desired last year, but he's someone else that can kind of fill in that John House role. John House is still on roster, but guys, I hate to be this way. He was kind of the bottom of the barrel. And this team got so much better that your starting safety last year is kind of he's going to be sitting the bench this year because of how talented some of these guys got. Juwan Gaston, a Houston transfer, another guy that can play that strong safety nickel spot. So this group is deep. I'll be interested to see how they play with this group. Again, they have guys that are long. They have guys that are athletic that can play a little bit of corner and safety. So it's hard to judge in June exactly where that starting secondary is going to be at. But again, much like I've said so far, I think this group is going to be better because they're deeper.
All right, Jake, we asked you on the offensive side, so we got to ask you on the defensive side. If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
There's a lot of guys that I would pinpoint. We talk about the Parker Hughes, a guy that didn't play all season. Does he have another breakout year like we thought he would? And Brendan Harris, a guy who's going to, hopefully play another full season. He could be a breakout guy. But I think the world, and MTSU especially, is ready to have Alex Mitchell back home. He's from Murfreesboro, went to local high school here, a guy that we all, those of us that are close to the recruiting side, when we saw he enter the portal, we were just like, this is a guy you got to get. He's from here. That's been your recruiting philosophy since day one for Coach Mason. He's got He's got over 100 tackles. He's a part of an FCS playoff team. Like, this guy has got to be number one on your list. They got him. Didn't take much time to get him here on campus. Obviously, he's from here. So I think, one, it was step one, get Alex Mitchell on campus. Step two, get him to commit. Now step three, let him feast, because I think he's going to have a big year, especially aside Parker Hughes. A lot of defenses could just run away from Parker Hughes last year. You don't have that option now with two very solid middle linebackers, especially ones that are as good as Parker Hughes, who's an all-conference USA, and Alex Mitchell, who also con there at Chattanooga. 100 tackles is hard to come by at any level, and having a guy like that is going to be huge for the defense.
Well, we've talked some offense, we've talked defense. Now let's move over to the special teams. How are those units looking, and are there any concerns?
There's a lot of concerns, and I think it's funny. Most people, special teams is what it is, but it is the third facet of the game, and that's something that MTSU was very good at last year. Very, very good. Luke Pascal, first time special teams coordinator here at MTSU, one of the best in the country coming here to MTSU, had the best punter in Conference USA. He had the best long snapper in Conference USA, and had one of the most consistent place kickers in all of Conference USA. Now you lose all three of those. Grant Chadwick, the punter, gets picked up, gets what I imagine is $1 million deal to go to LSU. And then you graduate Zeke Rakin, your place kicker. Brody Butler graduates, a guy that is getting some opportunity at the NFL level. It's funny because you don't think about these positions too often. And I'll pinpoint the long snapper position. You don't think about long snapper, but Brody Butler was perfect. And all you need is one bad snap to thank God my long snapper sucks. And so we never experienced that. And now we have two young guys, Connor Doherty, who has sat 2 years behind Butler, who I assume is going to take over that spot. But, for the first time in my life, I'm worried about long snapping, not because I don't know about this guy's ability, but because we've been spoiled by our long snapper. So I've reached my 1 minute quota talking about long snappers. So hopefully people will wake up and tune back in. But when it comes to place kicking and punting, they have a few options there. Balin Woodman is a freshman high school signee out of Wisconsin. He was a 4.5 star Chris Saylor rating. So for what that's worth to people, that's like a 5-star in the kicking world. A guy that has a boot. I mean, he can kick with ease at 55 plus against the air for what it's worth, but he has a boot. He punted in high school as well. He may take both duties. Ashton Logan is a punter transfer from Oklahoma. Didn't get any snaps at Oklahoma, but most people don't end up on Big 12 rosters on accident, SEC rosters on accident. So having some play there, it's going to be testy. I don't know what they want. One thing is for sure though, they want a place kicker that can get the touchback. Zeke Rakin couldn't do that last year. He just doesn't have the leg for it. Zach Benedict was a guy on the roster that they brought in specifically to do that and just wasn't consistent enough. So there's going to be a lot of tinkering this year on special teams. And I guess my main concern is I don't want the special teams to be noticed at all. I want them to be as plain as possible. Hit your 30-yard field goals, kick the touchback, don't fumble the snaps, don't get any penalties. Is that too much to ask?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. You'd hope as a kicker, like the coach just never notices you. You just fly under the radar. Well, let's move over. Now that we've talked about the special teams, we've talked about the defense, we've talked about the offense. I want to talk about which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into 2025?
The defensive line is probably the most concerning. Lack of depth, lack of experience past your starters. That's the area that really it's about making pressure. Can that line get pressure? And I understand that when you're probably going to lose some of that talent when you get past the starters and they have that rotation. So is the linebacker group strong enough to overcome a weak depth at line? If they have injuries, this could be a bad year for the run defense, which isn't, again, it's not the worst thing now that you're in a 3-4, but I have reasons for concern because my guess is they went out for some transfer portal pickups. They went big, swung and missed, and now we've kind of been left with the starters from last year, which is great, but they don't have that depth behind them in the event that we fall into what happened last year with injury. that is reason for a lot of concern.
In today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, and the transfer portal, how have you seen it change Middle Tennessee's recruiting philosophy?
Well, one thing that is, I love bringing this story up, and at first it was a rumor, but it's been confirmed by many sources within that Derek Mason going into his first year, just trying to get a feel for it, because his last time coaching, head coaching, that is, was kind of pre-NIL as we know it today. So one thing that I share this story because one thing that he had to learn is you have limited resources at this level. A guy that's so used to being at the P4, you have to find ways and be creative with how you use those resources. Luckily, now that the House has passed, they're going to be able to have revenue sharing from the university itself, which is going to help tremendously moving forward for G5s. But this last year, he decided we're doing away with all the alternate jerseys. We're doing away with all the alternate helmets. So for those that like to keep up with those kind of things, the Blue Raiders are going to be very vanilla with their uniforms this year, because it costs the Blue Raiders nearly $1 million a year to recondition all those helmets, to get those new jerseys, to get all that new equipment, to supplement all those. So just cutting out the jerseys to one pair of breeches, to a home and away jersey, and to one helmet saves the program $1 million. And why Mason decided to do that, as to lead into your question, specifically to create $1 million more that they could now use in NIL, which I said to everybody when I heard that rumor at first, now confirmed, so it's not really a rumor. When I heard that, I was like, could you imagine the offensive line that Derek Mason could get with $1 million? Well, we're going to see that this year, because all those resources went into building this offensive line. So I look forward to, again, maybe that pays out for him, and I hope it does, because a lot of people are going to be upset that they don't see those chrome domes anymore. We miss the chrome domes, but if it equates to winning more football games, I can do without the fancy helmets.
With given that the P4 seem to kind of focus heavily on the transfer portal, do you see Middle Tennessee having a access to a higher level of recruit maybe than they have had in the past?
I don't know. I think one thing that Mason has done a good job. I know I made my speculation about the defensive line targets, but I think Mason has done a great job of determining who he wants, who fits the Derek Mason middle-made, Burrow-built way, as he puts it. I don't know that we've really tried to access maybe that higher level of recruit, but he's done a great job of identifying who those guys are that he wants that fit that culture already. And really something that has impressed me, especially with this last signing class in high school, is that he's got a lot of guys. And that's something that I was kind of worried about going from year one to year two. Is he going to take a gamble in the portal, or is he going to put all of his assets into the portal? And we saw that in areas of need, like the defensive secondary and the offensive line. But he supplemented really well in the high school ranks with a lot of these kids that he's bringing in, kind of sprinkled throughout. That's something about the sign. He got a lot of running backs, a lot of wide receivers, but really he got somebody a little bit of everywhere. He's got the quarterback. He got even the place kicker, as I touched on. Didn't get any. We got 2 guys on the defensive line. So that's something that, again, I think he just understands his needs analysis very well. Someone that's very in tune with that. And I don't think he's going to waste much time trying to find those guys that are fringe G5, P4. He wants someone that's going to be a little bit more blue collar and earn their way to the P4, much like someone like Omari Kelly had done last year.
Well, Jake, how do you feel like the staff here at Middle Tennessee is doing navigating the portal, whether it's keeping their roster or finding other potential gems somewhere else?
I think they've done well. It's hard to judge in year 2 to say what the hit rate is, because a lot of the guys that they went for last year, like the Omari Kellys, well, that's a huge hit. But some of the guys they went for were a miss. But some of those guys that they got still retain on roster. So there's still going to be some level of turnover from that perspective. But I think collectively, like to go back to lean heavily into what I was saying earlier, they just know what they want. I think I think that they're going to find their way, especially on the defensive side of the ball, because now they're going to be finding guys more for the 3-4. The offensive side, Bodie Reeder, someone who I think, from a coaching perspective, as far as hot seats go, he needs to have a big year this year. So I think they did a good job at finding that transfer portal talent, supplementing it with younger guys that hopefully this year too, we're going to see higher hit rate on these transfer portal pickups versus year one, where we have Omari Kelly's and then we have guys who didn't play any snaps at all. We're going to find guys who are going to now contribute. I don't think there's any wasted transfer portal pickups.
What do you think the main strength of this 2025 team is?
I think it would just be too easy to say the quarterback. I know we didn't spend much time on him because you guys, if you follow G5 at all, you know how good our quarterback is. But he's pretty darn good. I implore anyone that hasn't watched MTSU football to find the time. We have midweek Conference USA for a reason. Tune in on ESPN2 during our midweek games and watch Nick Vadiato, a guy that is a very special talent. But this team goes when Vadiato goes. This team struggled to score last year, and he still threw for 3,000 yards. He still did that with a bad offensive line. The interception numbers didn't increase. He's still, what you would think with more pressures like he faced last year, that you would see those numbers increase, and they didn't. His interceptions actually stayed the exact same. Touchdowns dropped, but thrown for 3,000 yards, it was special. I love the thought of having a healthy veteran offensive line that we're just going to see that offense take that next step. And that's why I say Reeder might be a hot seat contender if this offense underperforms again this year because of how talented his quarterback is.
So, Jake, what does success look like for the Blue Raiders in 2025?
If you listen to anyone here in Murfreesboro, they want 6 wins, which is fascinating if you know the story of MTSU and Rick Stockstill, because in years past, we were crucifying Rick Stockstill because he could only get 6 wins. However, this year, if we could double our win total and get to 6 wins, we would all be ecstatic. And there's a lot that kind of plays into that, but success for them this year is win 6 games, get to a bowl game. This may not even really be an objective goal, but be healthy. Like, that's something that they really struggled with year one. And I know that's kind of an offshoot for your strength and conditioning coach as a goal. But like, if they can be healthy and return some of this underclassmen they have, that is success moving into 2026. So maybe not necessarily an objective goal, but it'll help him a lot down the stretch.
Well, if success is 6 wins, I don't know if you've got a chance to really deep dive into the schedule. I don't know if there's a portion of that schedule that is kind of like critical to get to that 6 wins, or a stretch that you feel like that this is the make or break time. If we don't get this win here, it's not looking good to get to that 6 wins because we've got a bad stretch or whatnot.
You said, do I think about, or I deep dive into the schedule? Luke, I've been foaming at the mouth at this schedule since the end of our non-conference schedule last year. It was absolutely brutal last year, starting off the season against Duke, Ole Miss, Western Kentucky, and then the Fighting Golden Eagles out of Tennessee Tech, which we got out of that game by the skin of our teeth. But I've been excited for this schedule because everything I told everyone all season long, everyone over at our Go Middle group, was it gets so much easier next year. It does, because you don't have that powerhouse looming in your non-conference schedule. Also, no one knew that Duke was going to start their year off like they did. I mean, Manny Diaz being an MTSU guy, that was impressive to say the least, but no one thought that Duke would be who they were. So again, that non-conference schedule was brutal. But Austin P, you're at Wisconsin, you're at Nevada, you're at home against Marshall. Way better than going to Ole Miss and coming home to Duke, and then having Western Kentucky at home. That first 4 stretch is vital, not only to just getting your feet underneath you, have a winning record for at least a certain amount of time, but to win some of that crowd back that you might have lost last year because you only won 3 games. There's still skeptics out there for Derek Mason. I have a lot of belief in him and what he can do because I think this team and roster has improved. And that first 4-game stretch is going to be critical into winning those folks back, because Wisconsin, not the strongest of P4 teams you have to play this year. I know Luke Fickell is going to he's done his part in trying to build that Wisconsin roster back up, but I'd like to think that that is a winnable game. You could potentially sneak up on Wisconsin there in week 2. At Nevada, the dumpster fire that is there in Reno, I can't believe I'm blanking on the coach's name, but I can't believe he still has a job there. And then Marshall, who's going through a complete turnover. So that's a good opportunity. It's a good program that you can win against. And secondly, it is your second toughest non-conference game. But luckily for Mason and company, it's in Murfreesboro. That's going to help a ton. And then to glaze over the conference schedule, you've got 4 teams in your conference that you face this year that have new coaches. You luckily get to avoid Liberty, and you luckily get to avoid UTEP with Scotty Walden, who, in my opinion, is the scariest team in Conference USA outside of Liberty and Western Kentucky. UTEP is if you want to, again, any betting advice, that might be a good team to take as a sleeper pick. But 4 teams, new coaches, new teams, Delaware, Missouri State. That's 6 games in your conference that is totally new to who Coach Mason is and who MTSU is. So a lot of opportunity for Mason to kind of assert himself as like, I took my beatings last year. This is now our time. And that's kind of the chip on his shoulder he's been carrying with him this year. So to say the least, I'm excited about this schedule because even your tougher non-conference or your tougher conference games, that is Jacksonville State, you get them at home. You have to go to Kennesaw State and Delaware might be tough, and you have to go to Western, but I think that's the least of your worries. If you're losing at Western and you're losing to Jacksonville State, I think you feel good about every other game and when and where it's played this year, because like I said, last year's was just brutal. So I had a long-winded discussion on the schedule, but I'm excited about it because there's a lot of winning opportunity here. And again, to go back on hot seats, I would be upset if he didn't get to 6 with this schedule. You have reason for concern because I think this is one of the easier schedules in all of college football this year.
Well, Jake, we've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else you want to share or think that we need to know about this 2025 Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders football team?
Well, for one, outside of MTSU, I do want to take a second. If you're not already, if you're a big fan, if you're listening, you're obviously already a big fan of G5 football. I, along with other hosts of the Conference USA podcasting roundtable, we do a show over the fall when football rolls around. We'll do some stuff here at the end of the summer, kind of previewing Conference USA. But if you can't get enough here at the G5 High, but they have tons of stuff here. Justice, Luke, y'all do great work. I appreciate you guys. But we also do stuff over at the podcasting roundtable for the Conference USA. Everything you need to know, we carry over into basketball. So I want to take a second to plug that as well.
Sure.
But even myself, kind of ramping some things up, much like you guys have done your player interviews. I think it's a great opportunity. So if you're not already, tune into the Blue Raider podcast, because a lot of good stuff coming this year, and this staff especially has done great work working with the media. We get a lot of good inside access to these guys. They make it an open book. So I look forward to the coverage that I can provide, and as well as the coverage that you guys provide for all the G5.
Well, Jake, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge of Middle Tennessee. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Luke, Justice. Y'all are the best.
If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 High.